Welcome back, everyone. I'm Howard Holton, CTO of GigaOM, and this is Discovering Disruptions in Tech. This week, I have Anubhav Arora from Cradlepoint. Did I do okay pronouncing your name?
Yes, thank you.
Excellent, excellent. And I think our plan is to demystify zero trust and really kind of dig into why this is such an important foundational philosophy and kind of give people some idea of what how they should think about it and what they should do about it. So why don't you give us a little intro?
Thank you, Howard. Excited to be here and welcome everyone. Yes, this is the age of zero trust, and while zero trust is a very well-known and very well-used buzzword today, it's not easy to know exactly what it means, exactly what the journey of an enterprise is towards zero trust, and how exactly to implement that. So here we are to talk about it a little bit more. I'm Anubhav Arora from Cradlepoint. I lead the security engineering teams at Cradlepoint.
Excellent, excellent. And you made a really good comment there that I just want to pull out and highlight. Zero trust is a journey, not a thing.
Yes.
Right. And it's a philosophy, it's a methodology, but it's not really, it's really not a series of steps and then you've accomplished it. Right.
Very true. Very, very true. It does start with putting the right foundations in place. It does start with putting the right principles in place and right processes of how to refine your journey in place. But yes, it is a journey. It's not a thing. It's a journey, and you take yourself towards more maturity in journey over time.
And there's an expectation that any zero trust maturity model today will change in 6 months, in a year and a half, right? So you also need to, as you kind of go through it, not get dismayed or disheartened because you were a 3 and now you're a 2.7.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
It is fundamentally a security framework. It is no more than a security framework. And all security frameworks are behind the curve, not ahead of the curve. Right.
That's absolutely true. That's absolutely true. Yes.
There was a post to LinkedIn the other day where somebody said, "Hey, I just found out that bad actors are using AI," to which my response was, of course, bad actors are always early adopters.
And who else? Bad actors who have the financing to do so first.
For sure. Well, and they're less bureaucratic than your average organization. And they don't rely on shipped products, released products, and supported products.
Absolutely.
Right. All of the restrictions that we have as the delivers and implementers of this technology, they have little of those, let's say.
Absolutely. And that's an important point on why zero trust is needed. I mean, bad actors today are anonymous, immune to prosecution, immune to accountability. Sometimes actually their whole purpose in life is what they're doing for the interest of their own organizations, and their own ability to utilize technology to come after certain organizations for certain organizations' data or credentials or other matters of interest is much, much higher than we expect from being, from not being aware of some of these constraints that they don't have, and some of the tools that they have access to, whether by their own nature or by the nature of the dark web outside there. So that once you realize the amount of resources they actually have and the amount of immunity, amount of simply the purpose they have, there is an absolute need to build your network the right way, so that you are able to thwart that attack in a way, or at least make, if not thwart that attack, at least put the hurdle so high that you are not in the limelight.
Well, and mitigate the possible damage, right? Because zero trust isn't just about prevention, but it's also about mitigation, right? It's about reducing the potential blast radius.
Exactly.
And fundamentally, right? We're seeing over and over and over again enormous blast radius reports.
Exactly. And that's another very important point, that what is zero trust? Sometimes it's deny by default. No, it's just not deny by default. It's like levels and levels of principles embedded into it, from deny by default at a policy level to deny or invisible by default at a network level. And then when you actually have something going on, you have to have the monitoring, the refinement of policy, and what you just called out, a limited blast radius, a faster time to detection, a faster time to remediation, a limited blast radius, a limited radius, not just from the principles of where the bad actor can have access to, but also what data they can actually have access to, so that your actual blast radius from a company intellectual property or reputation perspective is limited. So it is all the way ground up, from simple bits and bytes and packets all the way to organizational reputation, that zero trust is an important way of thinking for that.
Yeah, Santander was just hit, right? And all of the staff, right, all of their staff's HR details, which is 200,000 people.
Yep.
And all of their customer data was also compromised, right? And then you've got Ticketmaster, also compromised by the same group, apparently, is taking responsibility for those.
Yeah.
Do you remember the name of the healthcare, the hospital that was hacked?
I forget. It was just recently in the news, but it's been so many over time that when I was back, it was a few years back when I first heard about a real impact of ransomware in the healthcare industry, where patients died because of it, because there was operating theater level of disruption where patients couldn't get that service due to ransomware. So there's a continuous impact, and not just from the identity perspective, not just from financial perspective, but life and death. And that's and that takes it to next level, where it's not just that the people who are doing this have access to resources, have no accountability, have no threat of prosecution. They don't have the concern of life and death, and they would not even leave an institution like a healthcare institution, or an actual, not just a healthcare institution, but an actual hospital or a school system. They won't leave that too. So that's where the concerns for us on the other side, to develop the right technology, to propagate the right thought process on how to use the technology, whether anyone's technology, it's important, because in effect, you are looking at network level, security level, organizational decisions taking shape into these kind of events, which can affect people's lives. So that is where the importance of some of these things comes back up.
Yeah, and I don't think we can over accentuate the importance, right? It's absolutely terrible, the damage that's being caused. I was reading some comments from workers at the currently ransomed hospital, and everything is down. And so patients aren't getting the right treatment. They're missing triages. They're moving the wrong patients into triage rooms. They're getting the wrong medication, kind of on and on and on, right? At some point, these sort of things are not just the ransomware, but the fallout from the activities is simply not recoverable.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
And so okay, so let's bring it back a little bit, because this is this sounds terribly scary. And let's talk about really, when we talk about what we should do and what this means and how we should work with it, what are some good places to get started? How should we start thinking about these things, right?
Yeah. So I think that goes back to, in some level, we're talking a little bit on the network side and also host side and device side. And we have to consider together, what are we architecting our networks to be? How are we monitoring activity? How are we allowing access to different resources? How are we allowing access to different private resources, as well as the internet resources? And all of that together boils down into 3 or 4 ways of sort of picking up on what is the right way of designing this. And one of the ways that, at least I think of it in this way, is that the first thing that you really need to do is to, if you look at your own house, what is the first thing you do when you leave for a vacation? You bolt everything down and you lock every door. Now that is the first thing. And then if you have cameras in the house, you start looking around to see around the house, inside the house, if there's any activity, if there's noises. And then you start to look for any kind of events that might be then looking for compromise. So if you think of it in a similar way, how do you bolt down a network? How do you bolt down or lock down a network today when we know that networks don't have a perimeter? We have gone into a perimeterless network. We have so many branches, retail devices on different type of locations, people roaming around with different mobility solutions, and even laptops connected to public Wi-Fi systems. How do you bolt it down? And the way you think about bolting it down is that you put up a network which allows access in very, very specific ways. And if you do not have that kind of access, you cannot even see what is on the other side. You do not even know what is on the other side. And I kind of liken it to be, there's an image of a house with a lock and key. And if you remember back in Harry Potter, there was this platform 9 3/4 where if you had the right stick, you just walk through it. Otherwise, you don't see the platform. You just see a wall. And so the knowledge about whether there even exists a platform is only for those who have the right key. And that knowledge is how you kind of start architecting this network. So only if you have the right knowledge, which means if you have the right credentials, if you have the right authorization, if you're connected in the right way, and your policy allows you to see a certain resource, that's when you will be able to access only that resource, only that platform. In this case, only board that train, only sit in that seat and nothing else. And everybody else sees a wall. And that's how, the way I think about it is as an analogy is auto zero trust versus, some of the legacy solutions that might exist. And now you have to go back down into one more level of detail. How do you actually do this? And
sure. So let's pause for 1 second, because I do want to point out we're not talking about security through obscurity, right? Security through obscurity isn't security. That is just trying to hide a thing.
No,
this is systems that actively work at being invisible.
Exactly. These are systems that are completely invisible unless you have the right keys to access it. And there's specific technologies for that. There's technologies like single packet authentication, where once you can only access a particular service on a particular IP address if you have the right packet which has the right keys in it. And otherwise that whole system is completely unresponsive and you wouldn't even know if that service exists, that IP exists or not. So there are specific technologies we're talking about. We're not talking about obfuscation or obscurity. We're talking about making invisibility by making the IP address invisible in some cases through different type of technologies like natting or other things. But also specifically SPA is one way to actually make some resources, some services available only if you have the right keys and authorization on the other side.
Great. So why doesn't VPN work in this case?
VPNs have multiple different ways of working, and every VPN is not the same. So we, first to acknowledge the fact that every VPN is not the same. When we say VPN, though, generally what we would mean is that you're able to connect to a particular network as a part of the network, and you are yourself an extension of that network. So it's almost, VPNs in the early days were mostly designed that you have a LAN space, local area network, and with a VPN, you are an extension of the LAN. And as an extension of the LAN, you're able to look at everything that is in the LAN, or at least have policy control on that part, where policies dictate what you can look at inside the LAN. However, you are part of the LAN. And in many cases, the VPNs are also, using technologies today which might resemble an SPA. But even if you do SPA, the VPNs are mostly at a control level of layer 2 or layer 3, where you're looking for controls based on IP addressing or other lower layer controls, whereas the zero trust architecture demands that the controls are at application level, that every access from a client to a server, which is a server generally in zero trust architecture is called a resource, and a resource in general can be a private resource like I'm hosting it in my company, or an internet resource like a website or an application. And the application or the resource level access is to exactly that resource, which means that domain, that IP, that service, and that application protocol. And on top of that, then you induce the user level authentication and user level authorization. And once you have this establishment, you actually monitor this activity for any kind of abuse. So that entire set of principles most of these are not implemented in the case of a VPN. And many VPNs are different. So I'll acknowledge that some of them might be implementing some of these things, but in general.
Sure. But the traditional VPN exists at layer 3, layer 4 at the absolute best.
Yeah.
Which means if you want to look at anything above layer 3, you're likely having to bolt on something else to do inspection.
Exactly.
It doesn't natively do it, at which point you're already connected to the VPN.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
We can always inspect down the OSI model. It's very hard to inspect up the OSI model, if not just period impossible, right? You have to bolt something else on to do it.
Exactly. Unless you build for top down from all the way down, if you're at this level, and you'll find it hard to inspect up. And yeah, absolutely.
Sure. So I do want to give just a little aside, right? The reason we didn't do this historically, the reason we didn't do this in the past, is because processing was expensive when these technologies were created.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Let's be really clear. This wasn't oops, we made a mistake. It was the capability to do this when these technologies were created did not exist, right? I have this conversation about DNSSEC all the time. Yeah. DNSSEC wasn't possible because DNS was a replacement for host files to give you some consistency when that stuff was really costly. Today, we've got free CPU cycles all over the place. Yeah. And so now we're thinking about how do we leverage the resources that we have since our resource availability has changed, right? The scarcity of those resources have changed. And now we're enabled to do all this stuff from layer 7 down, and really should be.
Absolutely. And not just the resource availability, but actually cloud is an enabler also, because a lot of times all of the resources that you would have to do would be in a closet somewhere, but you have to put your own, servers have their own lifetime. You purchase one, you use it for a certain amount of time. In the cloud, your dynamicity of ability to actually upgrade your resources is very, very high. And as you increase your network area and number of users, you can onboard in the cloud at a snap. So a lot of these things have enabled us to actually put these architectures in place. While in the past, yes, you're absolutely right. We've probably been in a journey where every clock cycle was measured
for sure
into whether for passing a packet from ingress to egress, how many clock cycles are you taking in? And we've been measuring that now. Quite frankly, in today's world, very few of these technologies will be measuring at this level, because you can throw more resources at it as and when you need it. And the scalability of the whole solution is very, very different than the past.
Well, we also have the urgency, right? So cloud added urgency.
Yep.
Right? It's much easier to defend a fort when the fort is a hardened box. Right? And exactly. I know all of the boundaries of the box, and I know every cable that comes into the box.
Exactly.
But speaking of kind of your traditional data center, right? I have control of those things, and so I can get both a real and a false sense of security from that.
Exactly.
Then we move to the cloud. Then we go to a full mobile workforce. Like, let's be honest, right? It's more than 5 now, but let's say 8 years ago, no one thought about VPN. Why? Because 5% max of my workforce had VPN access.
Yes.
Right. And when it went down, you just told people, just come in the office.
Come in the office, yeah.
Right. I guess you're stuck coming in the office. Your stuff doesn't work. It's fine. Like, we'll figure it out. We'll fix it. Today, it couldn't be more different.
Yeah.
Right.
And so COVID was a big accelerating factor into this whole story. Also, it was probably naturally going to come anyway, but COVID, as you point out, was a major factor of distributed workforce, which required us to think about how workforces are not in the office, applications are not in the office, and hence security is not in the office. and security is in the cloud, applications are in the cloud, users are completely distributed. So how do you now put the perimeter in a perimeterless defense mode? And that's when zero trust actually picked up. Zero trust as a principles picked up as to how zero trust enables you to architect in a way that these things work together foundationally in a preventive mode. And then you put detection and response in the right things for the right problems, for the right type of compromises, which may still happen. I mean, credentials are still compromised, USBs are still plugged in, right? So even with zero trust, bad insiders still exist. So how do you then put the detection and response responsibility to be specific towards the problems that are not addressed or partially addressed using zero trust architecture? It made sense to think of it that way, that you put zero trust in the right way, take care of the distributed workforce, and for the rest of the problems, put the foundation for your detection and response systems, and then put the right incident response model, threat hunting models, and this whole security triangle at that point starts to make sense, because if you invert it in some way, meaning that your foundations are not right, your preventions are not right, distributed workforce is too big an attack surface, devices are too big an attack surface, then your onus shifts on detection and response. And we all know that the signal to noise ratio is very, very low there, and that requires a lot more workforce, a lot more machinery to churn, even CPU resources to churn to
sure.
correlations. And so that model starts to give you alert fatigue, which we have heard about in a lot. So how do you now try to take care of both problems together, meaning the distributed side of things, as well as the right security architecture that allows you to find incidents in a optimized way? Zero trust model helps in both, actually. It helps with both sides of things, the perimeter, as well as the right security model to say, detection and response to be focused on specific type of problems that may not be addressed by the foundations.
I mean, traditional security is effectively a funnel.
Yeah.
Right. We start by accepting kind of everything, and then as we move through the systems for more security, we continue to add layers and layers and layers, and we kind of funnel.
Yeah.
Zero trust is the opposite, right? Zero trust is a pyramid. We start with strong security controls,
exactly,
strong inspection,
exactly,
deny by default,
yep,
only allowing and authorizing those things that should be authorized,
yes,
which lowers the threshold as we move through, right? It's a pyramid instead of a funnel. You still enter through the same part. You still enter through the top.
Exactly.
Right? But your security controls start tight.
Start tight.
Right?
Start
and
tight.
Then
yep.
Theoretically, you have fewer alerts. You have less fatigue.
That's exactly the point.
You may not need less tools, but you also probably need less distributed granularity, because your granularity starts at the top and fundamentally starts with the opposite view. Right? If I cut down the traffic, then I have less traffic to look at each point.
And the same tool will work better.
Right.
Because underlying all those alerts that you're seeing, all those anomalies that you're seeing, underlying them is fewer incidents, is fewer problems to solve, fewer real problems.
It's fewer, it's less noise, it's just signal, right? Exactly. And that's where we get the fatigue. I don't know of anybody that's getting fatigue from reality. They're getting fatigue from noise.
Yes.
Right? I want the signal. I want to take action. I may be overwhelmed, but I'm not fatigued in the same way. I get fatigue from jumping to things that aren't real. I get fatigue from immediately responding to a red light that's not actually a red light. That's
what fatigue is. I mean, eventually, if you're bombarding your users with 1,000 anomalies a day, with what is their own capacity to actually look at them and investigate each of them to make sure and understand if any one of them is a potential threat? It's very, very low. You're actually pushing the burden back on the user, because the machinery is finding more noise than signal. So if the machinery has to find the incident by correlating things, it has to find the right signals to be able to correlate. Yes, the correlations can filter out some level of noise, but if there's a large amount of noise, it can't actually do its work either. So when you design this correlation sort of machinery, which is in response to kill chain frameworks like Matter Attack or other frameworks, if your signals don't have some level of fidelity in it, even that correlation machinery is not going to work. So At the very top level, when you start looking at from zero trust to monitoring to alerts and anomalies coming in to correlation to actually incident detection and then actual response to incident detection, you need certain type of machinery to be high fidelity signals, and they only come if your foundation is preventive. Deny by default, deny by default. And deny by default, again, going back to our very first sort of chat about it, you can't start with deny by default. You can start with deny by default to some level, but you can't start with deny by default, because when you actually engage in a deny by default like policy, you don't know what is to allow in all manner, right? So that's when it becomes the journey. You start with deny by default for certain known bad. I don't want you to go to bad parts of the internet. I don't want these people or any people to go to certain privileged resources except these. But then you put a more permissive policy in place. You observe the traffic. You see where your traffic is going, and then you go towards the maturity in policy towards deny by default. And that then helps in getting the right signals for your alerting mechanisms, and that is where your further layers and layers of correlation engines, whether they're SIEMs or XDRs or any other NDRs, they start working better to give you better incidents towards. And all of these things are, back to all principles of zero trust dictates exactly this. This is the right way to architect your network.
Yes. Again, I want to reinforce, it is a journey, right? So no big bangs.
No big bangs.
Don't eat the elephant all at once, right? Maybe start with the invisible edge, as you put it, right? Access from things outside of the box that you have tight control over, and put some zero trust fundamentals in place there, right? Yep. ZTNA might be a good place to start. SSAE, ENG, right? Cloud Network Gateway, secure access layer, zero trust network access, right? Something like that. And then I would also suggest build your zero trust policy, your zero trust architecture, your zero trust design, and your zero trust procedures, so that as you add new things to the environment, those things come online with deny by default. Right? Don't, please, dear God, don't try to turn on deny by default to things that are working today. Observability is really critical there. You can be much more specific in things that are new. Like, that should be part of your project plan. A stage in your project plan of bringing that product online should be the observability and network access as part of the design, right? As part of that effort, so that when it comes online, you've already done the observability, you've already gone through the documentation, you've already validated traffic. It's not going to be perfect, because again, it's a journey, not a destination, right? You have to expect tuning, but don't add to the technical debt, your zero trust technical debt, by allowing new things to be brought online without applying.
Right? That's a very, very good point. And because these days it's not just the IT devices like our computers that we are logged into right now. Computers are very, very IT sort of controlled. You have to label it, you have to ship it, you have to put all these applications on it. But then how much time does it take to put an IoT device on a network? Very little. And even users can do that outside of IT administration sometimes, if you know the Wi-Fi password, if you know this. So the device proliferation also demands that when you put your zero trust policies, zero trust principles in action, any new device is already through that process, whether it's IT controlled or sometimes a shadow IT asset, which happens a lot these days. And that's where some of you mentioned SASE, and it's important to consider network level controls in SASE or other technologies where the controls are based on groupings of certain types. So you can identify not just a person, but a group of people, some attributes of me that I would be granted certain kind of resources. Or if a device gets plugged into a certain part of the network, it has already certain kind of resource access or certain administrative access that it can do and nothing else. So that definition already exists. You plug in a new device, it inherits it, and it is part of that pool, and you are able to observe it. You're able to see that new device. You're able to see its traffic, and if needed, put more controls on it or less controls on it if as needed.
I like that. I like that last point, right? So you can put more controls or less controls, right? We do have a tendency to over-architect. We do have a tendency to over-engineer, and we do have a tendency to kind of over-policy sometimes.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Right? I love analogies, right? So think of it a little bit like the Wild Wild West and moving the law into town for the first time. You're not going to be able to solve everything on the first day. Maybe just collect the guns at the border to start. Right?
Yep.
Sorry, you're now in a regulated town. You got to turn in your firearms to use the story from Tombstone when Wyatt Earp took over. Right? Just like, let's start with some low hanging fruit. Let's start with some things that we're capable of, and this is really important, things that we can report on.
Yeah.
Right? One of the big reasons that I see companies not investing properly in security is the people holding the purse strings that write the checks don't understand the direct line of the benefit to protecting the business, right? My job as a C-level is to ensure to the board and my CEO that I am spending the money properly.
Yep.
Everything else is secondary to that.
Absolutely. And even that journey itself is complicated. And I'll just, you brought up analogies. I'll give you an example, like how complicated it can get. So we talk about observability, we talk about logging, we talk about, how much you need to have observation of your traffic and then use that observation to make your journey towards a better policy, to get to the right zero trust policy. But then the questions are how much logging do you really need? And it's a big question, right? How much logging do you really need? And purse strings, like you mentioned, depend on that. The more logging you need, the more dollars you spend, right? And a few years back, SolarWinds happened. First time we knew that we needed to look at an event 200 days in the past for a certain domain request. How many companies can do that? How many products can do that? How many technologies were even equipped to get you that answer, because 200 days had passed. So even if you had put all the logging in the world, most of that would have gone through it. So that journey at that point becomes very difficult. And sometimes you need to understand your own risk profile and tolerance to risk, whether you will have the appetite to solve or to even investigate an event like that or not. And it's a pertinent question today, and those who have the right risk tolerance toward, they don't have the risk tolerance towards such events, will invest into it and will log these events for a year now. But those who cannot afford that level of login, cannot afford to get back into that level of observability, will take that risk as an acceptable risk of happening once in 10 years or something, or not probably to their organization. So it also goes back to risk as another measure for many CISOs on where their purse strings will be opening up to, and what is the risk that we are susceptible to. So again, this is where, if you put the right zero trust foundation in place, your blast radius of even something like that happening is limited. So even if it did happen on your end, because you had a limited blast radius, you probably didn't go through next stages. Everything starts in stages, right? So these ideas then give the impetus back into the CISOs for their purse strings, for their risk tolerance on this is the right foundational model to build on, and then put the risk model on top to build more, resilience, build more logging, build more tolerance towards certain type of activity if needed, or intolerance towards certain type of activity if needed, and keep investing their resources, their dollars into the right way that their network demands.
Well, the tighter I have a policy, the less monitoring I need to do.
Exactly.
Right? Because instead of looking at everything and looking for the needle in the haystack, I'm really just looking for what violates the policy.
Exactly.
Right? If I say this application can only be accessed by these sources, I really need to look for, the number one thing I need to look for is an attempt from a source that's not that.
That's exactly.
And as long as the tools all work that I've put in place, I won't receive that alert.
I won't receive that alert.
That's the other thing that just won't happen. And then I know when that happens, I need to take some action because something has broken.
Precisely. So even if you had an ingress, the second step is a violation, and that violation.
Correct. And that violation should instantly trigger
instantly trigger a
Because
response.
the noise is so low, that's not going to happen often.
Exactly.
And it's going to point me towards some really quick actions. Like, I know there's a policy. I
Yes.
know this was a policy violation. I know the systems that control the policy. Now I know exactly where to look.
That's
Right.
that's exactly the design of the story, that it allows you to have actionable alerts, confidence in actionable alerts if your systems are in the right foundation, if your policies have reached the maturity of deny by default, then anything that violates that policy is potentially an actionable event, most of it, if not all of it. And you might find that in some cases that it is, you missed some part of legitimate interactions that you didn't account for, and then you say, okay, I'll open up to that.
For sure.
But,
For sure. We're not perfect.
Yeah,
By
you're not
no means are we perfect. By no means is, like, technology, process, and people. None of
exactly.
the three is perfect. Right?
But-
We use three things because it's not perfect, because we need multiple checks and balances, right?
Yes,
But again, journey, not destination.
exactly.
Right? So can we be better tomorrow than we were today? Should be the focus. Not can we be perfect today? It's not going to happen. Right? A
Yep.
day without a new CVE is a rare day.
It's a rare day, and a day without, a day in a security team where you're not threat hunting or you're not still triaging alerts is also a rare day. But the idea is that you should have a manageable workload of those, and that helps you get to the right posture.
Excellent. So if you could leave the audience with 1, 2, 3 kind of things they should do after hearing this, what would you say you'd give them as kind of 1, 2, 3 things to do?
Okay, part one, start with the right zero trust foundation. And what that means is create the right story for secure private access to your resources. Create the right story for secure access to the internet. Always consider devices in the middle of it. Devices are important. Think through the entire infrastructure on how it will or will not reduce your attack surface, whether it's from outside in or inside out or malicious insider, blast radius, different type of threats, phishing, web threats, and then create this isolation or this private access or this zero trust based network in the right way. Once you are there, monitor and refine, and keep your incident handling procedures, alert handling procedures, trainings always in the right space, because when you do all three things together, the hope is that you are in a manageable domain for all of these three things. And if there is an incident, you're quick to react, you're quick to take action, and you can take action that does limit any impact on your organization. And between these three things, you should have a strong defense posture for the organization.
That's great. So I'm going to kind of refine that just a touch. The first is figure out what you're currently doing today and where your funnel places are, right? Where are you funneling data through that you're inspecting that data, right? And where your control points are.
Mm-hmm.
Start there. Don't start at looking at your whole network estate. It's too big, right? But start with, what am I observing today, right? That'll give you the data to create the best policies. And where are my current control points? Because that gives you the best place to implement things.
Yep.
Right. And that'll help you identify the low-hanging fruit where you can take advantage of zero trust in the near term, start establishing those fundamentals, and start building that as part of your corporate and your security team's lexicon, right? Yep. Corporate, IT, and security all need to be on the same page. And those are the places that I would recommend starting, and the things that you could do today to start making a difference.
Absolutely.
Well, Anubhav, this has been a fantastic conversation. I think you and I could probably do 4 hours on zero trust with very little effort. But this has been another episode of Discovering Disruptions in Tech. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Howard.
If you could share and like and subscribe and comment, we'd love conversation. And if anyone listening has a suggestion for a topic you'd like to hear, we'd love to hear about it. So please join us again next time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you for the